Launch One with Mason Springer. I'm Mason Springer. Today, we're joined with Jacob Benschjöld from Sweden, and Jacob is quite the archer. He's competed on lots of different world stages. He's in the 900 club. He's got a lot under his belt and a lot of information to share today. This is actually my first overseas podcast, so hopefully everything's going to go pretty smoothly. I know we're about 6 time zones apart, something like that. But yeah, I appreciate you joining me today, Jacob.
Thank you, Mason. Great to be here.
Yeah, so I know you had mentioned that you're pretty good at field. Sounds like that's kind of your specialty, is along with some other stuff you've shot all around the world. But tell me, kind of like, what's your experience with field, and how'd you get into it?
So, field, the format that I usually play is World Archery, which are the black and yellow targets ranging from the 6 ring to the 1 ring. We shoot anywhere from 10 to 60 meters, and unmarked it's 10 to 55. It's kind of a special format in that it requires a lot more preparation, in like both that you need a good sight tape, of course, you need a good setup, you need to know your equipment and know your shooting, but you also need a judging system. Like, you need to be able to judge the targets using your equipment and get a pretty good reading on the distance for your first arrow. So what kind of drew me into that is like the reward you get for preparing very well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I actually shot my first World Archery field event earlier this summer, and I thought it was really interesting. I mean, very technical, like, especially judging the targets, your uphill, downhill, making sure all that is great. And then I also like the fact that you shoot multiple arrows at the target, so you have that chance to kind of dial in after that first shot. So that really interested me. But how did you get into, I guess, just archery in general over there in Sweden?
Archery in general, I mean, we have a club-based sort of archery community as opposed to like a shop-based community. So you basically, when you're either a kid or when you're an adult, you go to some kind of an event where you get to try a bunch of different sports, or maybe they come over to your school and let you try, and then you kind of get directed into your closest club if you're interested. So they will host beginners courses, junior courses, and stuff like that, and you get into different groups, like if you're in a youth group or a development group or some kind of other coaching, community. It's different in different clubs, but I know for my club, we had, when I was a kid, I got into it when I was 11, so we had, like, the juniors did their training earlier in the afternoon, and then the seniors would come in, and like you'd extend from 12 to 18 meters if we were indoors. And I got to try it at like an event where they had a bunch of different sports, and I really fell for it really hard. So I started, showing up very consistently, shooting past the junior times, and then going into the further distance for the adults. Did it very actively from the age of 11 to 14. And then once I turned 15, a lot of other things started happening in my life. So I had kind of a hiatus. Didn't shoot a lot, if any, until I turned 18, 19, last year of upper secondary school. Then I picked it up again, realized I had 2.5 years left of my junior career, see if I could do anything with that. And then in 2018, I won the Nordic Youth Championships. So that really got me back into the competitive side of the sport, where I had, a break of several years from competing and maybe picked up my bow once a month or something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. You talk about a club-based based sport versus a shop-based sport. I guess, the way I think about it here, like in Ohio and other places in America, is it's very shop-based, so like I don't know of any just clubs or like archery ranges. There might be a couple, but most of them are all, shops that have ranges, and you kind of go to the shop and shoot, and that's kind of how a lot of people get into it here. But yeah, the club's very interesting. I never really thought of it that way. And you talk about all the different world archery formats. It's very different here. Like, world archery, those type of formats are somewhat uncommon. It's a lot more of a niche part of of the sport here is, the World Archery formats. We're a lot more NFAA, you talk about the ASA, the IBO, 3D is really big here, as well as just your standard, like, 20-yard indoor stuff, which is, 18 meters for you guys. So that's really interesting, how it's different. But I mean, so you talked about the different distances you all shoot in different field and disciplines. Where are you at right now this time of year? I know field championships is coming up here I believe it's in Yankton this year in America. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. We were there in 2022 and now we're coming back in 26. So that was actually my first ever international field event in Yankton in 22. But basically what the season looks like is, you have the early season, which is April, May, where you start having some trials for bigger events. So I'm always aiming towards, national team spots. So I have to look kind of strategically at my event schedule and get the most field in that I can because we have a limited amount of opportunities to qualify. So I have to plan in a few field shoots. There are usually 4 or 5 opportunities to qualify. And then, the majority of my time is going to be spent on target, quite frankly, because there's no better way to get the amount of arrows that you need to actually improve than to shoot targets. So I go to as many target tournaments that I can and as many field tournaments as I can. And then if I have the time, I'll squeeze in 1 or 2 3Ds. This year I've actually done 3. So that's a lot for me. Usually I'll do like 1 tournament and then nationals. But field and target really takes focus because they have world ranking points. They have big events that you can go to, particularly target. So if you're looking to compete internationally, there's anywhere from 2 to 5 events you could go to with the federation. So you could do like a world championship, European championship, and you can do a few World Cups, or you could do some other international events like a European Cup or Veronica's Cup or something more local, but still international. So the majority of my time is going to be spent shooting targets. And if you ask, most of the high-performing archers in the field events, they're going to tell you the same thing. Like 90 to 95% of their time is spent on 50 meters if you're talking compound. It's like,
Yeah.
it's the best way to improve and get a lot of arrows in, because you could do, like, regular practice is 6 arrow ends. You go to collect your arrows, you shoot them again. That takes about, an hour to get 60, 70 arrows in. You can move to 9 arrow ends or even 12 arrow ends and put 2 targets up, and that lets me shoot almost 100 arrows an hour. Or 100 arrows per hour. Sorry, I slurred my words. But yeah, it's a very efficient way to get a lot of arrows in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. The 50-meter game is definitely huge for me throughout the summer, just, staying in good shooting shape. And even like throughout the winter, the indoor season, I'll even shoot, 9 arrow ends or 6 arrow ends, maybe even a dozen arrows in an end. Just kind of, keep up and, like you said, get as many arrows in as possible. But you talk about your archery season over there in Sweden. I know that here our season kind of shuts down at the beginning of August, because most of our, pros, most of the archers here are also bow hunters. So that's when hunting season kind of starts. And so everybody kind of puts away the target bows and goes and hunts until, the end of November, end of December. And then that's when indoor season picks back up. So what are you guys doing that time of year during our
I
hunting
mean,
season?
yeah, we don't really have an off season per se as archers, but as you say, the USA kind of takes a break for 1.5 months and then comes back in the middle of winter, basically. We sort of, move indoors after World Field and World 3D is over, so usually mid-October. And, shooting is kind of slow for a bit because nobody is expecting to perform their best indoors right at the beginning of the season. There are some exceptions, of course. I know Magnus from my club showed up and shot 594 World Archery scoring, so that's 54 X's in his first tournament.
Yeah.
So, of course, there are exceptions, but, everyone's just trying to transition from outdoors to indoors in that time. I know I take a few weeks of, just low volume, resetting, focusing on strength training and cardio instead of, shooting a mindless amount of arrows. So it's a healthy reset for us, like the autumn season, because unfortunately in Sweden, bow hunting is illegal. So can't do it. You have to do it abroad. Like all of our neighboring countries, basically, it is legal, but we would have to get, first a national hunting license, then we have to get an additional license for bow hunting, and then, the logistics of going abroad and bringing back meat and trophies so
Yeah.
it's a big hassle.
That's very different from here. Like, in like my state, Ohio, we can just buy a license for, it depends on your age, but 30, $40, and you can go out and shoot a whitetail deer in your backyard and take all that meat. And that's a big part of my diet actually is that lean game meat's very, very healthy for you, very good. But yeah, you talk about some of the, the weight training, the cardio you do in the October, November range. What all does that comprise, and how does that kind of affect your shooting? Because I know a lot of people pick or think of archery as not a real sport because you're not running and jumping and kicking a ball or whatever it might be. It doesn't seem as physical, but tell me a little bit about what that cardio and strength training does for you.
Yeah, I've always been like a big proponent of staying fit, both to, improve the image of the sport, but also for performance, mainly for performance. But I think they talked about it on the Bow Junkie podcast that compound archery was included in the Commonwealth Games, if I remember correctly. It was removed from the program because the audiences and the staff didn't really think the athletes looked like athletes. So I think staying fit in you know in compound archery, particularly the recurves are great at it already because they have the Olympic programs and they have different requirements for their teams and stuff. For compound, it's usually a bit more blurry what requirements there are physically and stuff, if there are any. But I think it's kind of my responsibility to stay fit and give the sport a good image, as well as, of course, getting a good boost in my performance, I feel like. Because when you're like me, who was trying to catch up basically to the existing national team during the pandemic, having a good aerobic base and a good strength base let me shoot a ton more arrows than I would have had energy and capacity for otherwise. Like that was huge. Like I could go up in poundage very easily. I could keep shooting for a long time. It wouldn't fatigue me as much and I would be less prone to injury. So usually now that I have sort of caught up, my strength training will mostly consist of like basic strength exercises in the gym. Higher reps, a bit lower weight than if I was, training for a 1 rep max or so. But basically during the winter, when my competing isn't as intense, my training isn't as intense, I will usually try to build up like an excess of strength for what I'll need in the summer. So that in the summer I can spend more time, you know, getting a bunch of arrows in, traveling. For a World Cup, it's a week of traveling. You have to be away for, 8 days or 9 days away from home, away from your usual diet, away from your usual training schedule. And so I want to have a bit of a buffer when it comes to my fitness.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes great sense. I never really thought of it that way, but maintaining a good image in sport is great. And yeah, creating kind of a buffer like that is huge. Is there like one kind of big tournament that you really like focus on training up to? Like I know for a lot of people here that could be something like Vegas. They train really hard during the indoor season leading up to like that event, or during the summer, maybe the ASA classic, down south. A lot of people will train really hard up for like that event. Is there one single event that you kind of base your training around, or is it just accumulation of like the World Cups and different stuff like that?
It'll depend on the season. Like this year is a World Championship year for field. Next year will be a World Championship for target. So this year my big focus is going to be target and field. But I'll do every bit of preparation that I can in like ahead of the world field championships. So I've redone my ranging system. I've got a system for judging angles now. I've gotten the precision cut program for making tapes and been working that out. Really doing everything I can to prepare, both for the events that I qualify in and then the actual event. So I suppose if there was one event that like I would most like to win monetarily, that would be Vegas, but I think for myself that would be World Field.
Yeah.
So that's usually when there is a World Field, that is what I focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So, I said earlier that I went to my first field this summer and, had everything set up. I had some really great kind of coaching on how to do it. And so I was able to do pretty well for my first time. But, stuff like the precision cut program really helps. I actually just did a podcast with the owner of Precision Cut that dropped, a while back there, and learned a lot there. But having a good sight tape's important, knowing your cuts for the uphill, downhill. But walk me through kind of like your, judging process for how you judge the distance on targets, because I think that's kind of unclear for a lot of people that don't shoot field.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really shook me when I got into it. That like, what, you guys aren't judging on the ground? Because that's what I was doing like before I started really training hard for national teams and stuff. Like I had no idea how to judge distance with my scope. And so I went to the unmarked field competitions and did pretty well there. And then I realized that, I could probably figure this out and do pretty well on the unmarked part as well. So basically, the first thing we have to do is decide or figure out which target we're shooting, because there's 4 different ones. There's the tiny one, the 20 centimeter, which will be in a 3 spot. That one's self-evident. Yeah, you can tell right when you approach the peg, like, oh, this is going to be a 20-meter target, which means that for unmarked, it's going to be between 10 and 15 meters. For me, that's 4 clicks on my sight tape. So I usually don't range it. I just decide if it's, short, far, or in between. And I can click my sight to there. So that one's pretty easy. The 40 centimeter target is always in, a ABCD kind of situation. So similar to what you would have in Vegas. You have A, B, C, D. If you approach the peg first as an A archer, you shoot the top left. If the CDs shoot first, you shoot bottom left. So that one's pretty easy too. Then comes the tricky part. So you have the 60 face and the 80 face, and they have overlapping distances where the 60 face hits its peak, like 35 meters. That's where they can also place the 80 face. So they can make those targets look quite similar distance-wise, and they can make them look quite similar in other ways too, like adjusting the size of the bail. So they can have a bail that is totally obscured by the target, totally obscure the text on the target, and then I know for some events they even have shrunk down like target pins. So they'll make them 30% smaller, so you have no way of knowing if there's a fresh face, like whether it's a 60 or an 80. Now there are a few things you can do to ascertain whether it's a 80 face or 60 face when you approach it. So if you have a slow group in front of you, you can see, the people scoring and pulling arrows. Like you can tell, okay, is this target or is this person 3 or 2 targets in height? Like you can just tell by the way people look against the target. But more commonly, you'll approach the target. A few people will have shot it and you can see arrow holes. So those arrow holes, because mostly people are shooting 5mm, 4mm, or like a 3mm, like an X10. Those are basically the 3 options, unless you have like trad archers on the course.
Yeah.
But for World Field and European Field, those are going to be the 3 sizes that you see. And those make quite distinct arrow holes that you can sort of figure out the sizes by. So like how does 6 holes in the 6 look on an 80 versus a 60 face? If you can learn that difference, then you're well on your way to distinguishing the targets. Another good way is if there have been a lot of groups, and if they are recurve and compound groups, which they usually be, then if there's like a really, really high hole in the one or even the paper like right above it, in a 60 face, then probably someone has judged that as an 80 face, put it like 8 to 10 meters too far, and then shot a high one. And likewise, if you approach an 80 target and there's a few holes in the 1 or 2, someone's probably done the opposite and judged it 10 meters short. So that's one way you can use to figure out sort of which target it is you're looking at.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually judging the distance, it's all about finding a good way to frame the target in your scope. So let's say I've approached a target that I know is a 60 face, or I know it's an 80 face. When I go to aim at that target, it's going to be a different size at 55 meters, 50 meters, 45 meters. So if I can figure out what those distances look like in my scope, then I can make it a very quick and easy process of figuring out how far it is. Like if I have 5 meters between every line, like let's say I frame the left side of the scope with the left, or the left side of the target with the left side of my scope, I can tell by how far in my pin is to the target, how far it is away. So if you learn how many meters are between the lines and you practice that a bunch, then you'll get really good at judging how far away they are.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how accurate are you able to get when you're judging that way?
I think my best performance was at Field Nationals last year, where I didn't shoot a single arrow in the 4 or below, except on one target where I just totally dropped my bow. My final score after that day was a 420, and I don't know if that's ever been done before in a Swedish course.
Yeah, I was
So
gonna say,
on that day, I was never more than 1.5 meters off.
yeah. Wow, yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I mean the highest score I know in my class on the unmarked day was, I don't even know if it was 400. And we've got some really good shooters in my class too. So that's really impressive. 420. That's really good. I know
I got curious. Sorry, I got curious. So I checked the between ends scoring for the USA Nationals, and some really prestigious, some really good archers had some targets that were like a 661.
yes.
So where they probably assumed it was a 60 face, but it was an 80 face, or vice versa. So it does take practice. It does take experience. Now that's both a good thing and a bad thing, because the level of entry is quite high, or the cost of entry preparation-wise is quite high for the game. But once you know it and once you figured it out, you have so much fun with it, and it feels so good to figure out the course where you know that they're trying to kind of trick you, and figuring out angles, and it's extremely rewarding.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing that I found. It's it seems like really hard at first, and it pretty much it really is. But as you get to doing it, probably some of the most fun I've ever had shooting was, at the Field Nationals this year on the unmarked day. Just when you can judge a target and be accurate and hit it in the yellow, it's like, wow, it's really gives you a real good sense of satisfaction. Which is
For
why,
sure.
it really surprises me that field isn't very popular in the United States. I know it's pretty big over in Europe, but we just really don't have that here. And so that's kind of why, you probably saw some of those, really prestigious archers here at Field Nationals that were shooting that, 661. They're probably making just, silly mistakes that cost them, points just because they don't practice field as much as guys like you do. So yeah, that's really interesting. I'd like to see field become bigger in the US, but it'll take a little bit of work. But yeah, so I mean for field nationals, we're getting closer on that. Or I mean world field championships, we're getting closer on that. What's your kind of travel schedule for that? So I assume, you're flying out here, going to Yankton, and then, staying several days, it sounds like. What's kind of your normal schedule when you're going to tournaments pretty far away like
So usually we'll probably fly out the Friday or Saturday before the event. Now, flying to the US means we're saving time. So if we depart at 12, we'll be landing at 1, basically. So we'll have consumed 0 hours in the day,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll have a pretty big jet lag. So we want to get there, a decent time before the event. Like for Canada, I don't remember if we had 7 hours or 8 hours time change, but it takes a while to adapt. So you do want to get out a good while before the event, and you'll be waking up at 3, 4 in the morning, not be able to fall back asleep sometimes. You'll feel great, like shooting in the morning, because it'll feel like lunchtime, basically,
Yeah.
for the first few days. But flying out is usually a few days before the event, so I will travel to one of the major airports, usually Stockholm, Arlanda, which is like a 6-hour trip for me, just getting to the airport, and that's where I'll gather with the rest of the team. We will take a flight to probably Central Europe, like Frankfurt or München or something like that, and then fly from there to, I think we went to Chicago the last time we went to Yankton. From Chicago, we went to Sioux Falls, I think, and then we got a bus organized by the NFAA to drive us to the venue.
Okay.
And we
Yeah.
got there, we had one day of unofficial practice, then we had official practice, and then we started qualifying on the Tuesday, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So are these trips, being on the national team, are they at all funded by Sweden? Is that all self-funded? How's that work?
It's a bit of half and half. Depends on the size of team that we're sending. Like if we only send one archer for each category, we could probably go for free. But we usually select a larger team. We want to have some juniors in there. We want to have, since we have such a strong barebow scene, we'll probably send, 45 barebow archers, some women, some men, and then some juniors. The juniors have their own budgets, but sometimes there's a bit of overlap. But yeah, it could range from anywhere. I mean, Madrid, which is in 2 weeks, is going to cost me about €1,000 or like $1,200, I think. So that's partially funded. It's a good price, I think, because there's a bit of stake for me to perform and to prepare. Like there's a bit of accountability there. I have paid money to be here, so it's not just like a free trip or a vacation trip, of course. So I do think that's a good price point if we could do more events. Now, Madrid was the only World Cup that we were offered this year as part of the federation. If I would like to do more, like if I would have to like to do Shanghai and Turkey and Mexico, that would be 100% out of pocket. So that would be, sure, I want to say $5,000-6,000, something like that, and
Yeah.
that's for one event. So it's a steep price increase. So Madrid was the cheapest one for us to send a team to this year. So they organized and put together like a package. We can send this amount of archers for this price. And so we're sending, I don't know what we're sending for recurve, but for compound, it's going to be me on the male category. We have Jennifer Vinson, Ami Fransson, and Jonna Torell, who makes a debut this year for a women's team. So we'll have me competing individually, we'll have a mixed team, and we'll have a women's team. And all of us are going for around €1,000.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not too bad for a World Cup. And you talk about the $5,000-6,000 to go to some of the other ones. Is that your travel costs? Housing, food? Is that where all that goes, or is that like entry fees? How does that all work?
Entry fees is the smallest part, honestly. The thing that really kills you is the World Archery accommodation. So the hotels increased dramatically in price for whenever there's a World Cup in the area. Transportation is very expensive. Food, if you want to go with what the organizers have solved, is also very expensive. Travel, of course, is a big expense. But mostly it is the logistics of just staying there. Like the housing and the food, basically, is the biggest chunk. Just having a roof over your head. So that's where you'll see like a bunch of teams exiting or entering very tightly to when they're shooting. Like some athletes will arrive like into the country 6 hours before qualification. Even though they are like world-class athletes, they will just do anything they can to keep that price down. Like I talked to the Slovenian national team, which medaled. I think they got silver at the European Championships just 1.5 months ago. They had a flight like 3 hours after their team final.
Mm.
So they scheduled it really tightly so that they could go home as soon as possible and stop spending money at the resort, basically. It was probably also a good move just for health reasons. We had a bunch of illnesses going around in Turkey this year. It was a situation, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I guess that's the stuff that you really don't hear about back here. I did not hear anything about that. But, as far as like the travel costs go and all that, yeah, that all kind of aligns with what I've heard, traveling to World Cups here in America, and even just going to events inside the country like Vegas, and then the Lancaster Archery Classic. That's a really big one. Like for a lot of people, it's kind of the same way. It's just it can cost a lot, and travel is your main cost. The entry fee is only a small part. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one thing I saw on your Instagram bio, and I want to talk about your Instagram here in a bit, but I saw a 900 club, so I assume you go to is that the JVD? Is that what that is, Kings of Archery? Or
Yeah, that is Kings of Archery JVD Open. So that's the Vegas of Europe, basically. It's the same format, just a bit compressed. We shoot 60 arrows day 1 and then 30 arrows day 2 plus finals. So that is what that refers to. This past indoor season, I got my first 900 there. After, 3 years of trying. So that's something I really wanted to put up there because it also kind of boosted my socials and my, confidence in other formats of competing as well. It's something I'm very proud of.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know I've yet to shoot a 900 at Vegas. I've been getting closer and closer each year. I've been there 2 times. The first time I shot 1 300. This past time I shot my 2 300s. And so hopefully this next year I can shoot 3 and call it a 900. But
You want to
that's
know
kind of
my
cool.
score for the first time I went to JVD?
Let's hear it.
299 times 3. So not a single one.
Yeah,
And then the second year I got one of them, and then third year, all of them. So
yeah, perfect.
turned into a good story, finally.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And actually, how I kind of first came across you was your Instagram, and it was funny. I saw your video, one of your all 30 videos, and I'm
Mm.
like, this guy copied my video. What is this? And because I had made a video and I called it Launch 30 because my brand is Launch One, and it was where I shoot 30 arrows and record them all and put it up on the screen. And then I looked at the date of your video. I'm like, well, he posted his before mine. I must have copied him. So I'm like, what in the world? But anyhow, so yeah, that was. But ever since, I've been kind of seeing your content pop up, and it's really good stuff. But what kind of what's your reason for making some videos and making some content? Is that just for the fun of it? You got other reasons you like to do it?
There's a bunch of reasons, honestly. Like when I got back into archery, around 2018, 2019, Chris B was doing a lot of tournament content, a lot of target archery content. I got really inspired by that. I thought that was a great entertainment and it was great visibility for the sport. So I wanted to contribute something similar. Also, there's, 1,000% selfish reasons. Like, as I said, we don't get to go to as many events as some of the more well-funded or higher performing countries. Like, I'm aware, and my sponsors are aware, that I can't go to all World Cups because we don't have the budget.
Hmm.
So to make up for that, I contribute some value by coming up with ideas and making videos, make content, both entertainment and educational and just for exposure. So it's partially that as well. It really helps me with like the career part of this, as well as I just really enjoy it. I studied some media in upper secondary, got pretty good at photography. I got into like not filmmaking, but producing video and stuff like that, and I really enjoy that part of it as well. And you mentioned the all 30 videos. Before those, I made an all 72 video, which took a lot of time because I didn't have a workflow. But basically, I broke my phone at Target Nationals last year. I didn't have a phone for 2 days, which was, a big adjustment. But the camera still worked on it. Like, it's an old iPhone 12. But when I got back home after nationals, I bought myself a new phone. I thought, this could work as a backup camera, like my old phone.
Mm-hmm.
And if I put an arrow through it, so what? It's broken. So that's what I used. I got it as close to the target as I dared, basically at 50 meters. And I figured, like, I've seen these videos on World Archery from ages ago with, like, Mike Schlosser, Stefan Hansen, Braden Gillenton, shooting all their arrows. It's just a video of super repetitive, but I enjoy it. It's just bam, and then to the target, and then bam, and to the target, bam, to the target. And, like, I don't know, it tickles my brain somehow. Like, I really think those videos are great. So I thought it'd be fun to make my own. And that's how that started.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it really is kind of a great way to make content. And you talk about, not really having a workflow for your content. What exactly does that mean?
Well, for that format of video, specifically, I didn't have a workflow. So I tried initially importing, I don't know if it was like 35 minutes of, one video of me shooting and then 35 minutes of filming the target. I tried to import that all into like the Instagram Edits app and try to chop it up and frame in frame and stuff like that. Didn't work. The file turned out to be like 15 gigabytes. My phone crashed all the time. So I realized after like 2-3 hours of trying to put it together, like, oh, this isn't working. And then I got DaVinci Resolve working on my computer again. That had sort of been dormant for quite a while. But I got that working again. It has a great like timeline section in it where you can just chop up your timeline. So I just put the clip of me shooting at the bottom. Then I put the clip of the targets above that clip, just shrink it and crop it, put it in a corner. And then I merge the clips. So at first I match up the sounds of like the bow going off and the arrow hitting. So they're like synced. And then I merge them and then I chop them up. And that takes maybe 20 minutes. So I'll be shooting for 35 minutes and then indoors it's probably 25. Just import those clips to my computer, put them into DaVinci, merge, chop up, export back into my phone, and then just put the score in on Instagram Edits and post it. So it's a very quick process now because I've got sort of a flow. So it's a very good format for me if I don't have like in educational content to put out or other content ideas. I can just make one of those videos. And it's got an additional benefit. So I talked to George Riles about this, about like keeping yourself accountable in practice and making practice matter. And making that sort of video has helped me with that a lot because when I press record, I have to make a decision. Like I have to promise myself that I'm going to post this no matter what the score is. And so you'll see both like the low end of my practice scores and the high end of my practice scores. I will post both. So I'll have bad days and put them out, and I'll have good days and put them out, and I'll try different stuff with my equipment or with my shooting, and then I'll probably disclose that in the caption. I did one with like a bow from 95 this winter. That was kind of fun.
You like 1995?
Yeah, older than
really?
me. Yeah, I found it on like Marketplace for $100. It was quite fun.
Oh, yeah.
But making that sort of video is great for pressure training. So you can shoot a million arrows in practice, but when you step on the line, all of those things that you learned in practice is going to just like run right off you in competition if you haven't practiced with pressure before. Like when I got back into competing, I felt like I had a really good grasp of what I needed to do with my technique, like what I should focus on, what I have to do to hit tens, and I could step on the line and I'd have to relearn like everything. It felt like I just forgotten the whole process. I was shaking like, you get tired of that. But with more experience in tournaments and more experience putting pressure on yourself in practice, and that could be just challenging your club mates or making bets or something like that, or you could do what I've done continuously for this indoor season, which is just record your round and post it, like no matter what you shoot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to do it. I think that can definitely help kind of, like you say, hold yourself accountable even in practice. I really like that. But yeah, that's probably something I should do. Maybe make some more launch 30 videos inspired
For
by
sure.
the all 30 videos. But yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. I think. Well, so like you had mentioned George Riles. What's your coaching situation look like over there? Like, where are you learning how to shoot, getting the technique? Do you have like a national coach you talk to, or how's that work?
There are people that I can consult with nationally. Like there are great shooters, and I ask for advice and input from time to time, particularly from Magnus, who practices at my club. He's been internationally active for a very long time, and he's got heaps of national medals and national records. So he's a very good person, very knowledgeable person to kind of bounce ideas with. So he's helped me a lot. Just having him there, seeing the scores that he shoots and then having him push me in national tournaments has helped a lot. That's like couldn't do what I do without him. But as far as coaching, with a dedicated coach, I've never really had one. Of course, getting into it and getting started, you have instructors. You have people telling you like, oh, you pull this back, you look through the peep, you put your finger on the trigger and you pull. Of course. And there are people who have helped me, as a junior from time to time in neighboring clubs because we didn't have a lot of expertise in compound shooting at my home club. So I've had people in neighboring clubs, give me input and some coaching, stuff like that. But when I did start to compete again, it was a lot of, reading on my own, watching a lot of like coaching videos, particularly like George Riles videos that really got me back on track and that really improved my shooting a lot. And I also use a lot of imaging, like how I want to shoot internally. I don't know how repeatable that is for other people, but there are a number of archers that kind of live inside my head. And when I need different things in my shooting, I just picture how they shoot and how I look shooting like they shoot, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and actually that kind of reminds me. I remember one time I kind of I said, I stepped back and I was watching some videos of me shooting, kind of looking at my form, and I'm like, okay, where can I improve? And everybody's form is gonna look different. No two archers look the same. But one thing I'm like, this the way I draw or the way I come to anchor, I don't really like how I do it. I'd like to, try a couple ways of doing it. So I pulled up videos online of different pros shooting, and I picked, a couple pros, and I'd start with pro number 1, and I'd kind of watch a video of them drawing back and, let's say, coming to anchor, and I'd say, okay, so they draw back here and then come to anchor on the side of their face versus drawing back here and coming up from the bottom. And then I'd kind of, I'd really inspect how they do it, and then I would go and try doing it the same way that they did and see the results I got. Then I'd try it with another pro and then another pro, and kind of find out which one worked best for me by imagining kind of how they're doing it and then comparing that with how I do it. Is that kind of what you're talking about there?
Yeah, that sounds very similar. So for an example, one of my issues is that I sometimes twist my release down like this, which kind of gives me some sideways spread.
Yeah.
So for that issue, I have Matthias living in my head, who has a very upright release, and I sort of imagine it how it looks when he's shooting. I have that mental image in the back of my head when I pull back and I come into anchor, and that's how I imagine going through my shot. And there are a bunch of different archers that I just have. I have a folder in my Instagram of just different archers shooting. For example, I can look at like Mike or Ella Gibson for like very tight execution if I feel like that's what's lacking, and just sort of watch their shots time and time again, trying imagining how I can make my body do that. And it's not to replicate them 100%. It's just to kind of get an ounce of their feeling or like an ounce of their technique into mine, just to help me on the day.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really helps. And that kind of goes back to kind of, I'm not sure if you've read any of Lenny Bosham's books, but I know they're pretty popular for like the mental game. And one of the things that they talk about is, visualization, like visualizing that perfect shot over and over again. And, when what they teach is that when you visualize good, perfect shot over and over again, it makes a good, perfect shot more likely to occur. So I think that's kind of the
Yeah,
same thing, when I visualize that perfect coming to anchor movement from one of those other pros, it kind of makes it easier for me to do it myself. But yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it.
for sure.
But yeah, so I know you had said that you went and practice this morning. So I guess it's kind of evening time for you. It's more midday for me here. But what does your typical practice day look like?
So for outdoors, it'll depend on what I'm preparing for. Like this Saturday, we had field regionals or district championship. So a lot of my practice was going into just shooting field targets at the different set distances. Going to my neighboring club, shooting a lot of angles. They have a great course that I can practice on. Spending a lot of time, recognizing what my cuts are going to be, how I'm going to shoot different targets. There are a bunch of techniques for shooting hills, both uphill and downhill, that I have to practice. So this past week has been a bit fewer arrows, maybe 100 to 150 per session, but it's been more, closer to what the competition is actually going to be. Like very close to how I'm going to shoot the actual field course.
Okay.
So when we talk targets, it is valuable, I think, to visit different courses, shoot in different conditions, but the majority of my practice I want to get in like a calm environment, not a lot of wind, not, the sun right into my face, just so that I can focus on the shooting part. And then I can do some sessions in other locations, like for instance, like Magnus, as I mentioned, very seasoned archer, he has his own 50-meter range in a completely different location, facing in a different direction, with different wind that I will go practice on ahead of Madrid. And I'll also do another shoot at the neighboring club, just to get a feel of different conditions. But arrow count is going to be between 200 and 300 most likely. So for field, it's going to be a bit lower because it's a lot more technical, and you shoot 3 arrow ends. Targets, as I said, I can shoot close to 100 arrows per hour if I'm shooting 12 arrow ends. So the volume is going to be much higher.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And you talked about shooting the uphill downhill shots. I'd say that's pretty, I say that field isn't very popular in the US, and that's pretty much true. But we also do have a lot of different types of archery that include those uphill downhill shots. Like, 3D, some of the ASAs can have some good uphill downhill, varied footing, where the footing isn't very great. You've also got Total Archery Challenge, which is becoming really big in the US. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it's like an extreme 3D event, targets all the way out to 120 yards. And those ones can have some extreme uphill downhill shots with bad footing. But explain to me kind of some of your strategy with keeping your form tight when your footing isn't good, or you're shooting way uphill or way downhill. Explain some of that to me. What's your
So for footing, I usually don't settle and get into my shot until I have a very solid base. So if you've ever like shot a course with like Dave Cousins or Tim Gillingham or some of the other very, very in-depth field archers, very technical field archers, very experienced field archers, they will spend a good amount of time and sometimes take a time penalty just getting good footing. Like they will dig up rocks, they'll make a little platform, they'll kick away a bunch of dirt and build up, so that they have a great foundation for the shot. And that's super valuable. So for footing, of course, it's good to be able to shoot with with some bad footing, and like your toes angled down, or you're standing on different weird hills and roots and rocks. But usually we will try to put ourselves, because it's not ASA, we don't have to touch the stake or stand over the stake. We can stand in a 1 meter half or quarter circle behind the peg. So depending on if you're A or B, you'll stand left or right of the peg, and you have quite a bit of room to work with. So you can usually find some pretty good footing, and if not, you can build yourself some. So if you have a good pair of chunky boots, you can use those like an excavator, and you can just scrape up a lot of dirt, pad it, and then stand on that as a platform. If not, then, you'll have to settle for what you have. But when it comes to shooting angles, a lot of the stability comes from keeping shoulders in line with the target and deciding where you're bending. So Paige talks about this on her page, which is, I think 100% correct, which is if you were just bending at your shoulders, like just dropping your bow like this, you'd get a completely different draw length. And likewise, if you were just aiming right up like this, you'd get a completely different draw length, because look at my shoulders. They're nowhere near in line with the target. But if I angle my whole body, like bend at the waist, use my core muscles, then I will have a much more solid base. I can execute my shots kind of like usual and shoot the course better.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Now, what about like I've heard some people talking about, if you're shooting uphill, you want to, have more of an open or closed stance versus downhill, and then sometimes, you want to make your stance a little bit wider. Sometimes you want it narrower for the uphill downhill shots. Does any of that come into effect for you when you're shooting field?
I do open my stance for downhill shots if it's a pretty steep angle. Like I will point my toes more towards the target, and that helps me twist as well as bend at the waist. Because if you're just bending, then your rib cage is there and pressing against your pelvis and stuff, and it gets very tight. But if you can open up and twist a little bit, it really helps with the aiming it downhill, I feel like. Wide and narrow stance is not something I've tried a bunch, but it'll all depend on where you have good footing. My stance will widen if that's beneficial just for stability, or it'll go more narrow, like say if I'm squeezed between two rocks and I only have this little space to stand on, or I'll have to put all the way on my back foot and put my right foot on or my front foot on like a completely different surface.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And that kind of makes me think of a question I thought of earlier. You said that, when you're shooting that 20 centimeter face, you've got it between, 10 and 15 meters. Pretty close. One shot I remember we had at the national field nationals was such a steep downhill shot that 20 centimeter face was only, I think like 15 meters line of sight distance, but it was so far downhill that you had to have your, sight setting above the top mark on your sight tape, which is,
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense unless you've done it before. But have
yeah,
you
that's
ever,
100% trial and error.
yeah, yeah. Is there any rhyme or reason to that?
I mean, I just try it. Like there are a bunch of good courses in Sweden where we have the opportunity to practice those sort of shots. So historically, I have done pretty well with steep angles. Like we had one, I think it was a 10 meters target at European Field in 2023, which was I had my sight 2.5 full rotations above my 10-meter mark. So that was a really, really steep target. But for those things, you just kind of have to try it. I know there are cut charts from like Precision Cut, but we don't get to bring a rangefinder. We do have to judge the distance as well as the angle, just from eyesight. And so what I've started doing, which is probably, tucked away in a manual somewhere from the 90s or 80s, is that when I stand like in a neutral stance and have my cam against my hip, just straight arm, resting my bow, I can tell that my top axle is going to be pretty much parallel with the ground. Middle of my limb is going to be at like a 10, 12 degree downhill. My limb pocket is like 15, 20. The bolting holes is at 20 usually. Where the shoot-through riser connects on my dominator, that's like 27 to 30 degrees usually. And so I can use that to kind of judge the angle of the downhill shots. I don't have a system for uphill yet, but I'm trying to figure something out.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way to do it. Judging uphill, downhill, especially when you don't have a rangefinder like that. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Yeah, but yeah, like you say, with those some of those really steep shots, like I think the biggest thing is just to practice it. That's really the best way to do it. And that brings me to 50 meters shooting in the wind. Like I remember going to the Buckeye Classic, which is one of our bigger 50-meter shoots in the U.S. And I was there last year, and that was kind of my first like big 50-meter shoot, and actually my first 50-meter event ever. And I was out there shooting practice, the unofficial practice the day before, and I'm like, man, I just could not get this wind shooting down because all the other formats I do, there's like really no wind. I practice down in a valley, so there's no wind down there, and so I really just wasn't used to it. And I'm like, just blowing all over the place and spraying arrows everywhere. And I remember talking to several of the pros that were there, some of the big names. I'm like, what can I do to shoot better in this wind? And pretty much the answer I got the whole time was just practice, practice, practice. There's really there's not like one magic trick that works, but that's as far as I know. Do you have any tips that might be good to implement in practice when you're shooting in the wind?
I mean, one that could be valuable is finding out, like, really getting familiar with your arrow and bow setup. Like, I shoot a 415 grain parallel pro out of a Dominator with M2 cams, so it's a heavy arrow and a very fast bow. Like, the wind does not affect me the same as if I was shooting 50 pounds on a slower cam and like a 5 millimeter arrow. So really know what your drift looks like. I am not an expert in shooting in the wind, and my scores reflect that, unfortunately. But yeah, really get familiar with your setup in different wind conditions. A lot of events will have like a wind sock at the middle of the field, and so that will tell you an approximate not just which way it's blowing, but how hard it's blowing. And sometimes you'll feel no wind on the line at all, but there's a ton of wind, like in a strange, mysterious wind tunnel between you and the target, or just at the target. So sometimes you'll feel no wind on yourself and no wind on the flag on the target, and you'll hit like mid nine left, and you have no idea why. But there are a ton of tells that you can use. You can also, if you're unsure, you can hang back a little, wait a few seconds, see where the first arrow lands from like the two targets right and left of you. So if you know those archers and what their typical mistakes are, you can kind of get a read by doing that. But otherwise, it's just getting very familiar with your setup, getting familiar with the venue, because I can tell you that the range in like Antalya, where we had the European Championship, it has a strange way of behaving in the wind, and you gotta shoot there to get familiar with it. I feel like so there are a bunch of examples like that, and there's tons more that I don't know. And if you speak to Mike or Matthias, they will have, and Braden, they'll have some great answers for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of little stuff that those guys have learned for after shooting in the wind all these years. But one thing I hear a lot of people say, and I don't know if it's the best advice or not, but some people are just like, go out there, and if you don't know what to do in the wind, just like punch that trigger a little bit. And for me, that's never worked. But is there any change in your shot process when you're shooting in the wind? Are you going faster, slower on the trigger? Like what's your process there?
I'd say my consciousness kind of moves from execution to aiming a lot, and I don't know if that's for the better or worse. So I aim very actively in the wind. So, for example, like I shot a match against Matthias this European Championship, and we had a consistent right to left wind. So I was very consciously trying to aim mid nine to the right, and just kind of letting the execution happen on its own, so I could focus on aiming there. If there's no wind, then I can focus purely on execution and just pushing into the middle of the target, because that's where my brain wants the dot to be. Like if I don't aim actively, I want to aim in the middle, so I'm going to move towards the middle unconsciously. So I kind of have to override that and very actively aim out of the middle, which is always a strange feeling. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And so one thing I remember experimenting with a little bit was, canting my bow into the wind just a little bit. That way I could still, aim in the middle, but then, impact impact a little differently. So yeah, I guess, and some people, I know some people aim off, some people cant their bow. I've even seen some people like give it clicks. But yeah, so many different ways to do it. But yeah, so I mean, as far as arrow setup goes and like knowing your bow and weight for shooting in the wind, as far as like stabilizer weight and overall bow mass weight, where do you land on that when you're setting up your bow for possibly a windy tournament? Are you going heavier on the stabilizer weight? Are you going lighter? Are you going the same? What's your thoughts there?
I'm not really changing anything, honestly. I like to shoot 18 to 20 ounces on both my stabilizers and 3 to 4 ounces at the bottom of my riser. And I shoot the same for everything. Like it's very ingrained at this point how that behaves sight picture wise and execution wise. So I'm very reluctant to change any of how my stabilizers do just because an event is going to be windy. Because any event you go to can start out calm and then turn windy or vice versa. So I'm not really one to change my setup just for the conditions on that day. I like to keep that consistent and then, maybe be a bit more aggressive in my shots instead.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to doing some more 50-meter. Like the first, real 50-meter event that I'll be doing this summer is in, a couple weeks. It's, again, the Buckeye Classic like I shot last year, and then we've got some Joad Nationals that following week. So that's going to be really fun. I've been practicing a lot for that. Like you say, the 50 meters is just a good, that target is just a good way to really find out your shot and just getting that good rhythm. But yeah, as far as that goes, that's kind of what I'm gonna be doing for the rest of summer, and then we get into the hunting season, and so we'll be doing that for a couple months until indoor season picks back up. But yeah, I guess that's when you guys will be practicing and getting better.
No, don't get it twisted. Like, from my understanding, hunting season is one of the best things you can do for your competitive career as well. Because the pressure shooting at an animal, it's got to be very comparable, if not more pressure than shooting in a shoot off or a finals.
Yeah, yeah, actually, you say that very much so. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I'd say the most pressure I've ever felt on a shot has not been, in the final stage at Vegas or in eliminations at Lancaster or some of these big tournaments I've been to. It seems like the most pressure I've ever felt has been, shooting at some critter. That's kind of that's a good point. I think it is very good practice, and I think learning to shoot a hunting setup can be great practice too. A shorter axle to axle bow with short stabilizers and no lens oftentimes. So yeah, I think that that's a good point. I guess there are a lot of benefits to hunting when it comes to your target game in the off season as well. But yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. That's some good information. But yeah, this has been a great podcast, Jacob. I'm glad we were able to talk here for a little bit, and I think I learned some stuff.
Well, happy to be of service.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Hey, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can they find you online?
Since I have a pretty unique last name, I just search Jacob Benschjöld, spelled Jacob with a C, and then Benschjöld. Jacob Benschjöld. And I should show up on just about every major platform, like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I even have a YouTube now, although my content is entirely in Swedish. So if you're a native or you're learning that language, go check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. Well, I appreciate your time today, Jacob, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, Mason.